All right, welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into something core to academic research, assumptions.
That's right. And we're drawing heavily from some excellent points made by the Instagram account Academic Practices.
Exactly. So our goal here is to unpack what assumptions are, why they matter so much, and how you can handle them or at least spot them based on what this source suggests.
Yeah, it's all about helping you get better at evaluating the academic work you come across, making you a sharper reader, really.
Okay, let's jump in. So, an assumption. In everyday life, we kind of know what that means, but what about in a formal study?
Well, in research, it's basically something the researcher accepts as true without directly testing it in that particular study. It's like the groundwork they need to lay.
So it's not something they prove within the paper itself, but it's needed to even start the work.
Precisely. It's foundational. And these assumptions, they can pop up in different spots.
Like where?
Maybe in the method they chose or how they collected the data. Sometimes it's embedded in the theoretical framework, the sort of big ideas behind the study, or even just how they framed the problem.
Gotcha. Could you give us an example or two from the source? That always helps make it click.
Sure. So a common one is assuming survey respondents understand the questions exactly how the researcher meant them.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Or another one might be assuming certain economic indicators, say GDP growth, accurately reflect a complex real-world thing like overall well-being. You accept it to move forward.
Right, you have to start somewhere. But why is this so critical? Why does accepting these things without testing them in the study affect the outcome so much?
This is where it gets really interesting and why it matters for you as a reader. These assumptions, even if they're not always obvious, directly hit the study's integrity, its validity.
And how you interpret the results, I imagine.
Exactly, how you interpret the findings. If those underlying assumptions are shaky or just plain wrong,
Then the whole conclusion could be weak.
spot on. If assumptions aren't identified, or worse, if they're unrealistic, the conclusions can be pretty misleading. A reader who doesn't know what's being taken for granted could get the wrong idea entirely.
So being upfront about them is actually a strength. Shows rigor.
Totally. The source makes a great point that explicitly acknowledging assumptions, and crucially, justifying why they're reasonable assumptions to make, that seriously boosts credibility.
Oh, okay.
Peer reviewers actually like seeing that. It shows the researcher has thought critically about the limits and foundations of their own work.
That makes perfect sense. It's like showing your calculations. So where should someone look for these assumptions in a paper? And how should they be phrased ideally?
Usually you'll find them laid out in the methodology section, maybe the theoretical framework section too. But the key, as Academic Practices points out, isn't just listing them.
Right.
They need to be stated clearly so others can scrutinize them, and they need that justification, that reasoning based on theory or prior evidence.
So not just, I assume participants were honest. Needs more backing.
Exactly. The source uses that kind of example. Instead of just saying participants answered honestly, you explain why you assume that.
Like what?
Like, given the anonymity provided by the questionnaire design and the absence of incentives to misreport, it is assumed participants responded honestly. See? It gives the reader a basis to evaluate that assumption.
That's much clearer. Really helpful. Okay, what about finding assumptions that maybe aren't stated so clearly? Any tips from the source on that?
Yeah, Academic Practices offered some really practical advice. First, just be aware of your own thinking. What are you taking for granted? Try to write it down.
Self-reflection, basically?
Kind of. Second, check the literature. How do similar studies handle assumptions? That can shine a light on common ones in your field.
Makes sense. See what others do.
Third, talk about it. Advisors, colleagues, peers, they often spot things you're too close to see. A fresh pair of eyes is invaluable.
Good point.
And finally, don't just set them and forget them. Revisit your assumptions as you go. Your research might evolve, and an assumption that seemed fine at the start might need rethinking.
Those are really concrete steps. Okay, so let's pull this all together. What's the main takeaway message about assumptions in research?
I think the core message is assumptions aren't weaknesses. They're actually necessary tools, building blocks, especially when they're handled transparently and justified properly.
So acknowledging them makes the research stronger, more reliable.
Definitely. It improves the overall quality and trustworthiness.
And for the listener, for you reading academic work,
Understanding this whole concept, what assumptions are, where to find them, why they matter, it just equips you to be a more critical reader. You can start asking, okay, what's the foundation here? Is it solid?
right? Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to chew on. If pretty much all research relies on accepting some things as true without proving them in that study, how does knowing about these untested truths change how you think about certainty, about how definite the conclusions really are? Something to consider.